I know Josh is on a tight time schedule here. He's got a flight out of Mobile at 3 o'clock, so I want to try to get started on time. We are actually live. Thank you. Ordering the court. We have some judges here. Maybe we can get some of our circuit judges.
There's this massive.
I know we have two our most esteemed jurists from both sides of the bay here. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who do not know, my name is Matt Green. I am president of our local Federalist Society chapter here in Mobile. We are the Brevard Hand Alex Howard chapter. For those of you who are joining us this afternoon via Facebook, the Federalist Society is a nonpartisan and libertarian organization dedicated to freedom, federalism, and judicial restraint. The Federalist Society seeks to promote the legal education in the community through its programs and publications about how limited constitutional government based on the rule of law can have a positive effect on law and public policy. The Federalist Society is founded on the principles that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of powers is essential to our Constitution, and that is emphatically the duty and province of the judiciary to say what the law is and not what it should be. The Society seeks to promote an awareness of these principles through events like today. I'm going to be brief in our introduction. We are very excited to host Professor Josh Blackman from, well, he was at South Texas College of Law, and now he's at Houston, and I've heard him say in prior events it's kind of complicated about his...
Complicated.
There you go. Kind of like our subject today. But briefly, Josh is really an authority on the Obamacare history of litigation, the actual bill itself. And we're here today to talk about his new book, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty and Executive Power.
Which I will sign to you after the
Thank you very much. We're excited about that. This is actually his second book. His first book was Unprecedented, was the name of the book. And for those of you who haven't picked up a copy, pick it up. And one of the things I like about it is the footnotes are at the bottom of the page.
No endnotes.
I don't have to go to dig on page 400 to find out the site. And he is actually very good about citing just about every proposition in the book.
There are almost 3,000 footnotes.
Okay, I knew that there was voluminous. So this is not a book of an opinion. This is factual. It's a riveting account, really, about how it started out with Hillary Care and what went behind the making and passage of the law is really quite incredible. Josh briefly was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in law, and has twice testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of the executive action on immigration and health care. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, where he was there recently last month, and I posted that on our Facebook and on our Twitter accounts. Brilliant. You were introduced by Elias Shapiro, is that right? Who's also been a former speaker here as well. Josh is founder and president of the Harlan Institute, founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league. Maybe he'll tell us about that in a little bit as well. He's also got a fascinating blog. Recently, yesterday, maybe after he finishes on his book today, he'll tell us about what transpired up in Montgomery yesterday.
I was there.
With the Chief Justice and the...
it was crazy. It was a sorting hat ritual. It was crazy stuff.
It's very interesting, his blog post, and he'll tell us about that. So without further ado, please welcome Josh Blackman. Professor Blackman.
We're friends here. Call me Josh. So it's a pleasure. My first time in Mobile. I was in Birmingham on Wednesday and Montgomery on Thursday, so I'm slowly making the trek down to the Gulf. And after this, I go back home to Houston. This is a very fitting conclusion for my talk. Thank you so much to Matt for hosting me, to Matt's mom for making a delicious lunch, and to everyone else who took time out of their busy day to come see me. Today, I'd like to talk about my new book called Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And this book tells a story of how Obamacare was born, how it's implemented, and how it's falling apart before our very eyes. Before we can talk about Obamacare and where it began, I'd like to begin by saying what came before it. For when I do this lecture on college campuses, and I show people this picture, they have absolutely no idea what it is. But you all know what this picture is. Back in 1993, President Clinton assigned his wife, First Lady Hillary, still Rodham, she was still Rodham back then, Hillary Rodham Clinton, to make a universal health care push in the United States. It was known as the Health Security Act, although commonly referred to simply as Hillary Care. This bill would have given every American one of these little cards called a Health Security Card that would guarantee them a right to health insurance. Now, at first, people didn't really know what to make of this bill. You know, all these other foreign countries have national health care. Why not the United States? But the most potent reason why Hillary Care failed was a series of commercials. And remember these commercials? Ringing a bell? People nodding. These were the Harry and Louise commercials. The premise of these commercials that ran on TV was you had a mom and pa sitting at a table saying, you know what? This really complicated healthcare bill, I don't want it. Why? I like my doctors. I like my health insurance. I don't want to lose it. Indeed, year after year before Obamacare, people were polled, do you like your insurance? And overwhelmingly, 80 to 85% of Americans said they like their insurance. They like it. People said, I want to keep my insurance. Hillary will put the government between me and my doctor. No go. These commercials basically killed Hillary Care, and they actually gave the Republicans a House of Representatives in 1994. And they taught us an important aspect of healthcare economics. I promise this will be easy to understand. There are three things you want in insurance: price, comprehensiveness, and availability. Pick two, because you can't have all three. If you want healthcare that's affordable, it's not going to be very comprehensive. If you want healthcare that's very comprehensive, it is not going to be cheap. And if you want healthcare that's available or accessible to everyone, regardless of their health, it's going to be expensive. This is like Adam Smith stuff, right? You cannot violate the law of supply and demand. You cannot have insurance that's simultaneously affordable, comprehensive, and available to everyone. You cannot have it all.
It's in chapter 1, the trilemma.
Oh, indeed. So you read chapter 1. Very good. This is what's called the trilemma, like a dilemma, but a trilemma of health insurance. But Hillary learned a lesson. If people think they're going to lose their health insurance, the entire thing falls apart. So how did President Obama negotiate this trilemma? With a lie. A lie that you've all heard dozens of times. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Now, this was a lie, right? We make no bones about it. It was not true. The reason why we know this is a lie is because the president's own administration made regulations that made it harder to keep your plan. His own government made it harder to keep your plan because it said you have to have this and you have to have this. If it doesn't have this, your plan's canceled. But even worse than lying, this created a false sense of entitlement to the American people. The sense was this: we can give health insurance to a lot more people, but it will not affect what you have. Impossible. Impossible. But to this day, people still labor under the impression that we can magically give health insurance to 30 million people and in no way impact the health insurance you already have. This distorts our culture, and it creates this sense of entitlement that is awful. And this is perhaps the worst aspect of Obamacare. 3 years later, they're still saying, well, we'll let you keep what you have, but we're going to take it away, and we're going to tax it. But people still think they can keep what they have. My friends, not true. But it was on the basis of this false promise that the Affordable Care Act was able to go through Congress in 2009 and 2010. You may remember at the time, after the 2000 elections, perhaps not Alabama, but the Democrats swept nationwide. There were 60 Democratic senators, and in the House of Representatives, Speaker Pelosi had like a 40 or 30 vote lead. So at the time, Republicans said, we do not want anything to do with this Obamacare thing. Do it yourself. What did President Obama do? He said, you know what? We're going to pass this by ourselves with only Democratic support. It was a very deliberate choice made to say we will pass this on a straight party line vote. So on December 24th, 2009, right at Christmas Eve, the Senate considered this bill known as the Affordable Care Act. It was nearly 3,000 pages long. No one read it. No one read it.
You got to pass it before you can read it, right?
You got to pass it to find out what's in it. And how do we know no one read it? Because Max Baucus, the chairman of the Finance Committee, said, I pay other people to read these bills. I don't have time for this. Okay, so government. So the bill that was passed on December 24th, 2009 was not meant to be the final version of the ACA. The idea was, let's pass this version, get our members locked in before Christmas. Then the House will pass their version, And then we'll have a conference to negotiate and figure out where we're going to wind up. That conference process never happened. Why? Because Senator Ted Kennedy passed away that summer. And he was the 60th vote in the Senate. And Ted Kennedy was replaced by Scott Brown, a Republican in Massachusetts, who ran the platform of stopping Obamacare. Once the Republicans had their 41st vote, the Democrats could no longer keep a filibuster-proof majority. So what do? Do they abandon Obamacare? Of course not. They said, here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to pass this draft version of the bill. This incomplete version that was never meant to be final, that no one actually read, that's going to be Obamacare. So the bill that we have today was never meant to be the actual bill. All the things that are falling apart weren't even designed that way. We're basically living with a draft, like version 1.0, right? Speaker Pelosi said, well, we'll pass it now. He stole my line. And then we'll find out what's in it later, right? Pass the bill to find out what's in it. She meant that quite literally, because they hadn't had an opportunity to actually negotiate the terms of the bill. So we are living with this abomination that was never meant to be final. Never meant to be final. And the House Republicans, Speaker Boehner at the time, had no power to stop it. He simply lacked the votes. So on March 22nd, 2010, a date that will be seared in my mind forever, I was actually in Washington, D.C. that day. I hadn't planned on it. And there was this massive Tea Party rally in D.C. I wasn't attending, but I was walking around. And they were chanting, kill the bill, kill the bill. And these people were all over the place making all this noise. But there was nothing they could do to stop it. And the key point that I want to highlight on this chart is right there. See if I do it quickly enough, I can make a zero. Not a single Republican supported this law. Not one. And there's a couple ways of looking at this, right? So the first way is that, the Republicans are being intransigent. They're opposing Obama's agenda because, they don't want to succeed. Probably true. But on the other hand, they wanted nothing to do with a law that would centralize power over 20% of the American economy and put government between us people and their doctors. The reason why this chart is significant is to this day, Republicans have no buy-in to the ACA. They have no interest in the law succeeding, and in fact, they've voted 60-odd times to have it repealed. Those votes are going nowhere because the president would veto them, but they have these votes on a frequent enough basis to make their campaign commercials sing. In any event, the bill passed the Senate, the bill passed the House, it goes to the president's desk for signature, and this was March 23rd, 2010. He's smiling, he's happy, he's like, yes, we have Obamacare, it's going to be awesome, right? Everything's going to be awesome. Not so fast. Within 7 minutes of President Obama signing the ACA into law, lawsuits were filed across the country, in Virginia, in Florida, and elsewhere, challenging the constitutionality of Obamacare. What was the problem? Obamacare had a provision known as the individual mandate, which required people to buy insurance and to be insured. Can the federal government make you buy something? Right, that was the question. This was the subject of my first book, Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare, which is on sale on Amazon for $15, so it's even cheaper than my current book. Can the government make you buy broccoli? Can they make you buy health insurance? The Supreme Court, in a decision that breaks my heart every single time I read it, by the Chief Justice said, no, they can't make you buy health insurance, but they can tax you for going uninsured. Huh? They can't make you buy it, but if you go uninsured, they can tax you. What's the difference to regular people? Absolutely nothing. But the end result is Obamacare was upheld by the Chief Justice's 5th vote. Breaks my heart every time I read that case. After the decision in NFAB v. Federalist, it went to the political process, right? Could the Republicans elect a president in 2012 who would be able to repeal and replace Obamacare? Mitt Romney was the nominee. He was quite possibly the worst possible candidate in 2012. Why? Because as governor, he created Romneycare. And Romneycare was a precursor to Obamacare. Mitt Romney worked hand in hand with Ted Kennedy and Jonathan Gruber to create this statewide health reform in Massachusetts. During one of the debates, President Obama told Mitt Romney that you are the godfather of Obamacare. And you want to know what? He was right. The election happened, as we know. Barack Obama won his second term in office. The Chief Justice swore him in yet another time. I would love to know what they're saying right now. It's like, thanks, buddy.
I got your back.
Yeah, I got your back, right? But the case went forward, and the White House remained in President Obama's hands. The second phase I like to talk about is religious liberty, or as I refer to in the book, conscience and contraception. During the debates over the ACA, you may recall that the biggest controversy concerned funding of abortions. Would Obamacare use federal taxpayer dollars to fund abortions? And pro-life Democrats like Bart Stupak of Michigan and others said they would not support the ACA if there was abortion funding in the bill. So how did President Obama resolve this dilemma? He signed an executive order which said, I will not fund abortions with Obamacare. Now, all of you are smart enough to know an executive order is worthless because it can be repealed with the president's signature. And this executive order was really worthless because it didn't actually do anything. But this was enough to secure the votes of these pro-life Democrats who then supported the ACA, and they had then enough to get them over the the threshold in the House of Representatives to pass. But perversely, this hasn't been the big religious liberty controversy over Obamacare. The big controversy has been over something else that didn't get much attention at the time. It was over the Women's Health Amendment, sponsored by Senator Mikulski of Maryland. Now, a few of you asked before about the Little Sisters and otherwise. I'm going to blow your minds. Obamacare, the bill Congress voted on, does not have a contraceptive mandate. What? The actual bill that Congress voted on does not use the word birth control, does not use the word contraceptive, does not exist. So what are we fighting over? The ACA has a provision known as the Women's Health Amendment. The Women's Health Amendment, which says that insurers must provide, read it's a little bit small, with respect to women, quote, preventive care. So when you have insurance from your employer and you're a woman, you get, quote, preventive care. What is preventive care for women? I don't know, mammogram, colon cancer screening, different types of cancer screenings. You know, you can use your imagination what preventive care means. In their infinite wisdom, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Health Resources Service Administration and the Institute of Medicine said, you know what, we know better. Preventive care means the full range of FDA-approved contraceptives, including the morning after pill, Plan B and Ella. The entire debate over the ACA, there's no reference to birth control anywhere in there. They say in a few spots family planning, whatever that means, but Congress was very careful, Democrats know what they're doing, not to mention that this would make nuns buy birth control pills, because that might have sabotaged the bill. Instead, they stayed quiet, they put this word preventive care in there, knowing full well how the bureaucracy would interpret that term. And as a result, we now have this Women's Health Amendment, which gave rise to the contraceptive mandate. This was an actual advertisement put out by the government in Colorado, encouraging young women to sign up for health insurance. I'll read it to you if I can do it in mobile without getting in trouble. It says, let's get physical. OMG, that's, oh my God, for those who don't know. OMG, he's hot, my favorite. Let's hope he's as easy to get as this birth control. This was an actual government advertisement. So the consequence is perhaps this young lady, you can see her giving thumbs up, he's looking very smug, he knows about to go down. But the consequence of giving this woman free birth control is who's got to pay for it? Nuns. You see, the bill Congress passed didn't have any sort of conscience clause. It said any employer with more than 50 employees is subject to this mandate, including nuns who hire janitors, nurses, custodial staff who aren't Catholic perhaps, they now have the government right to request on their health insurance plan access to the morning after pill. As you can imagine, this was very controversial. So the Obama administration said, okay, we're going to be nice to religion. Here's what we're going to do. If you are a house of worship that caters primarily to people of the same faith, we will exempt you from this mandate. Now, think about that for a second. If you're a church and you run a food kitchen, like a lot of churches do, and you're open to the public, you don't check baptismal certificates at the door, you are not religious enough to get this exemption because you're not serving primarily people of your own faith. The Little Sisters of the Poor let people stay in their home. It's a retirement home, regardless of their religion. Anyone can stay there. They're open to, whoever's elderly and sick and poor, they can live there. This was the initial compromise that if you only have a house of worship for your own people, we'll give you an exemption. This blew up. Even Democrats were angry at this. So they revised it again. There's a second round of accommodations. It said, well, any house of worship is exempted. So if you're a church or a synagogue or a mosque, you are exempted. What about a religious charity? What about a religious charity, right? The nuns at the Little Sisters are not working in an abbey. It's not like Sound of Music, right? They have a retirement home for the elderly and the sick. They were not exempted. They were accommodated. Now we ask Josh, what's the difference between an exemption and an accommodation? With an exemption, the employees get no birth control. Go buy it themselves in the marketplace, go get Obamacare, whatever you want, but they get nothing. An accommodation means the nuns don't pay for it, someone else pays for it. So the government is still using the nuns' plan as a conduit to provide the birth control. So again, the exemption, totally out of the system, they get nothing. Accommodation, they use the nuns' plan to provide this birth control. Or in their words, they're hijacking the Little Sisters' plans as a conduit to provide birth control to the employees of the organization. This was the Obama administration's idea of how to balance religious liberty, saying, well, you don't have to pay for it, someone else will pay for it, we'll simply use your contract to provide it. As you can imagine, this proved to be controversial, not only for religious charities, but also for for-profit corporations such as Hobby Lobby. I'll get to Hobby Lobby in a minute, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the politics of Obamacare. In the pivotal period of the spring, summer, and fall of 2013, this was a very serious time. Now, if you had asked me, after Mitt Romney was defeated, after I finished my first book, is the battle for Obamacare over, right? Is this thing a done deal? And I always said, yeah, probably, right? Obama won. Okay, I wrote a book about it. That's about it. How wrong I was, which means maybe you should be listening to me now. My predictions are usually awful, but I was quite wrong. Because during the summer of 2013, you may remember these commercials. My senator and a member of the Federalist in good standing, Ted Cruz, barnstormed the country and put commercials on TV saying we need to defund Obamacare, right? We need to stop Obamacare before it starts. And Cruz and Senator Mike Lee of Utah formed this virtual army to try to stop Obamacare. So here was the plan, right? Obamacare exchanges opened up on October 1st. Right? That's when the Obamacare exchanges opened up, October 1st, 2013. The budget, in effect at the time, expired on September 30th, 2013. So again, think about this. Budget finishes September 30th. Obamacare opens up October 1st. So Cruz said, aha, we got it, right? If we can defund Obamacare by September 30th, it will never open up. Okay, so a reality check here. First of all, the Republicans control only the House and not the Senate. And there was a 0% chance the Senate would approve a budget that defunded Obamacare. Second, there was also a 0% chance Barack Obama would ever sign that into law. Third, even if he signed into law, even if the president vetoed it, you cannot override the veto. Fourth, and this is the big one that people don't actually realize, you can't defund Obamacare. The way Congress wrote it in 2010, it was a permanent appropriation. What does that mean? It doesn't require a new annual appropriation from Congress. This thing is like a cockroach in Keith Richards. It cannot be killed. The only way to defund Obamacare is to repeal the entire damn law. The entire thing from top to bottom. You cannot defund it. So this strategy was perhaps politically savvy, but practically speaking, it did not have a chance of success. Maybe he could have gotten some concessions out of it here or there, but the strategy by itself could not work. But they executed the strategy regardless. And in September of 2013, Senator Ted Cruz began a 23-and-a-half-hour filibuster from the Senate floor. Now, to be precise, it actually wasn't a filibuster. The reason why is a filibuster is defined as speaking as long as you can. As long as you keep speaking, you're allowed to stay up there. Cruz had a hard deadline. He had a hard stop. Because the next day at noon, a vote was scheduled. And under no circumstances could he go past that noon vote. Which is why people say, well, Ted Cruz filibuster shut down the government. It's not accurate. He could not speak beyond a vote. And at that vote, the Senate voted to fund Obamacare. So Cruz's role was actually quite minimal. Although he did read, this is actually Dr. Seuss' book, Green Eggs and Ham to his kids on the Senate floor from his filibuster. And this is actually Cruz in the first night, and this is actually Cruz by the end. He was kind of, his tie's coming down, looking pretty tired.
Mr. Smith goes to watch.
Exactly. If you look carefully, though, this pin, it's a battle flag of Gonzales, the come and take it pin, if you know my Texas history. But in any event, Cruz's filibuster motivated the House Republicans who were girded for battle. They didn't quite know how to finish the battle, but they were girded. And the end result was on September 30th, no budget was passed, and the government shut down. Now, the idea of a government shutdown is something of a misnomer, right? The number one thing we see is, oh my God, the federal parks were closed. The government never actually shuts down, right? You still get your mail. You still get your Social Security. Medicare, Medicaid keeps coming, right? All that happens is certain employees who are deemed non-essential are furloughed, and eventually they're given back pay, so they have nothing to complain about. They have a short inconvenience, but they get paid in the long term. The easiest way to fix this problem would be to say, during a government shutdown, keep the parks open. Keep the parks open. Because why? What do you have? It's political. You can use your shutdowns to parks to make a political point. I'll give you an example. Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. It's a frickin' mountain. It was closed. They actually closed off the roads opposite the mountain so people came and stopped and look at it. The Grand Canyon is a hole in the ground. They closed the Grand Canyon. Although, curiously, Statue of Liberty in New York, the government of New York reached a deal to fund it, keep it open, so that landmark was able to stay afloat, no pun intended. But the most visible symbol of the shutdown was the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. You have this group called Honor Flight that flies vets to World War II to see their memorial. And they come in early in the morning, they go to the memorial, and they fly back at night. It's a really, really good program. I had actually signed my grandpa up for it, but he didn't get picked before he could no longer go. But it's a good group. The vets weren't so much interested in these barriers. So what do? Well, if the shores of Normandy can't stop them, a bunch of stupid metal gates will not stop them either. So they literally carried these gates across the street and dropped them at the White House lawn. That was that. But that didn't last too long, for the simple reason that not only was the government shutdown crisis unfolding, but the debt ceiling was rushing in. And what's the debt ceiling? It's the limit of how much money Congress can borrow. And effectively, they were about to run into that limit real soon. So eventually, the Republicans caved. They caved completely. And not only did they fund the government's entirety, not only did they raise the debt ceiling, they actually repealed the sequestration, which is a way of cutting spending. So the government shutdown strategy, the defund Obamacare strategy, was awfully unproductive and actually lost policy points. You actually had it worse off than if it never happened in the first place. So it was a bad idea, top to bottom. Even worse, though, than the government shutdown was the attention it took away from the website. Yes, on the very time when the government was shut down and everyone was focused on these memorials and these, the parks and everything else and these furloughed federal employees, healthcare.gov launched. Or at least it was supposed to. You see, the website cost $2 billion, billion with a B, $2 billion. It didn't work at all. It was something of an absolute nightmare. For days at a time, the thing wouldn't load. People who had, trying to buy insurance simply couldn't, sitting around loading forever. And this became a serious liability for the president. For the simple reason is, this was defining his presidency. And there was actually talk for a brief period of, do we have to scrap this thing and start from scratch? Right? Do we just simply skip over it? So the president called in the nerds. This was a so-called tech surge. We had a bunch of engineers from Facebook and Google and elsewhere come to Washington, D.C. Now, when you think of a tech surge, right, you think of Iraq, right? You're in trouble when you're naming your IT policy after a war plan, okay? This was problematic. But the remarkable thing is, the tech surge was not like this bus full of nerds. But like 5 or 6 people. Like 5 or 6 people. And these 5 or 6 people did what an entire federal bureaucracy could not do in 2 years, which was build a functional website. And in the span of about a month, the president said, I promise, please let it work. By Thanksgiving, he says, please let it work by Thanksgiving. And by Thanksgiving, for the most part, it worked. But this was only shielding up the next controversy. And the next controversy was the cancellations. So we go back to the promise. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Again, this was, of course, a lie. It could never be kept. But people only realized that this was a lie in the fall of 2013, as roughly 4 million Americans received in the mail one of these cancellation notices saying, hey, because of the new healthcare law, we cannot renew your policy, right? Your policy, maybe you like it, maybe it's cheap, maybe it's affordable, but it doesn't cover all the things Obamacare requires. You're canceled. Sebelius was called testified before Congress, but the president's promise was dubbed the lie of the year, and indeed it was a significant lie that ensured the passage of the ACA. Had this lie not been told, I can say this with some credibility, had this lie not been told, we would not have Obamacare. If people were so worried about losing their policies, we'd be right back at Hillary Care, it would have been toast. So this was an essential lie to get across the hump, to pass Obamacare. So what happens? People now who've had their policies canceled say, okay, now I got to buy Obamacare. I don't know where this Obamacare store is. It's probably somewhere. I
local Piggly Wiggly.
Exactly. I haven't seen them. I'm sure it's somewhere. But eventually, by the end of the first year, the president boasted that 8 million people signed up. So I want to actually break down the numbers. Seeing the news now, this many million people and this many million people. The first thing you need to keep in mind is that a lot of these people are not actually paying for their insurance. They're signing up, using coverage, and canceling. So of these 8 million people, maybe about 7 million actually paid for their policy throughout the entire year. The other million simply used coverage, canceled it, and good luck collecting.
Free riders.
Free riders. But even worse, about half of these people had their policies canceled. Right? You took away the plan they liked, and then you made them buy something new. That was probably more expensive. That is not much of a compromise. And to give you a sense of how we are, this was in 2014. Today in 2016, government estimates were we'd have 20 million people signed up for Obamacare. 20 million. You know what the number actually is? 10. We are barely halfway to the government estimates. And you wonder why the insurance companies are running away as fast as they can. They price their policies expecting 20 million people to be in their network. They have half that. So no wonder the costs are going through the roof, and that's why they're leaving as quickly as possible. The government's plan, we're going to use more outreach and social media to get young people to sign up. Good luck with that, because premiums are going up, deductibles are going up, co-payments are going up, networks are shrinking. The product of insurance is becoming less enticing, and people simply are saying, no, we do not want it, no thank you. Every year, I have students who tell me that they simply are going to take the penalty and choose to go uninsured rather than buy a product that they'll get no value from. That does not sound good for the future of Obamacare. Indeed it is.
I thought it was a tax, Josh.
Well, it's funny you mention that because you're seeing now Jonathan Gruber, these same geniuses who built this, saying, well, we need to make the penalty higher. We need to penalize people more for not having insurance. So you've taken away the policy they liked. You've made it unaffordable. And now you want to penalize them for going uninsured. Brilliant. These are the essential planners that we have to delegate our entire economy to. Geniuses. But let's go back to the Supreme Court in our remaining time. And I'd like to talk about three main cases. There's Hobby Lobby, a case called King v. Burwell, and the Little Sisters of the Poor. And the first aspect of religious liberty requires me to discuss a case from 1991 called Employment Division versus Smith. Al Smith was a Native American who lived in Oregon. And as part of his religious sacrament, he used peyote. Everyone knows what this is? It's a sort of hallucinogenic cactus that's used in a lot of Native ceremonies. Mr. Smith worked as a drug counselor. You can imagine his employer wasn't too happy to find out that he was doing illegal controlled substances. So he was terminated from his job. Smith then applied for unemployment from the state, and he was denied benefits because he was let go for cause. He was fired for doing illegal drugs. Went to the Supreme Court. And Smith said to the Supreme Court, hey, look, you can't deny me unemployment benefits because I'm engaging in my religious ritual. In a very controversial 5-4 decision by Justice Scalia, no less, the court said, too bad. This law applies generally. No one can do drugs, right? You're not targeting Native Americans. You're not targeting Christians or Baptists. This law applies mutually to everyone. And as a result, the state can apply this law and not give you the benefits. Now, back then, Congress agreed this was a bad decision. So you have Republicans and Democrats. That's Orrin Hatch, and that's a much younger Chuck Schumer. Championed a bill known as RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what RFRA said was that if the government wants to burden your religion, they have to have a really good reason for doing so. And even more importantly, they must choose the least restrictive means of burdening your religion. So if the government can do something in one way that burns religion, and another way that doesn't burn religion as much, they have to choose the least restrictive way that burns religion the smallest amount. Okay? This was a statute, and Congress said, we don't like what the Supreme Court said. We want to give additional protection for free exercise above what the Constitution requires.
Alabama has their own state river.
Indeed, most states have them. The reason why states have them is because in a case called Burning v. City of Flores, 1995 or 6, the Supreme Court struck down the federal RFRA as applied to the states. The Supreme Court said, states, you cannot be sued for this. Congress, you can't put states in this position. So as a result, Alabama, Texas, a lot of other states enacted their own Religious Freedom Restoration Act. In fact, you may recall Indiana passed a RFRA about a year ago. Mike Pence got in some trouble over that. But these laws do exist. And it was under this law that Hobby Lobby challenged the contraceptive mandate. Hobby Lobby is a business that started off in a garage making picture frames. They started off with one store, and now stores all over the place. I think I see a couple in the Gulf right around here, so I'm sure there's...
We have some here.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some very nearby. They're a craft store. But even though they're a craft store, religion is a core component of their business. They're closed on Sundays. They have Christian counseling in their store. They support charities. And even though this, they're nationwide, I think they're in all 50 states or close to it, it's not a publicly traded company. It's basically owned by David and Barbara Green. They're the co-founders, husband and wife. And all this might look like an Easter card. It's actually a picture of the board of directors. The family's owners of the company through a trust. Everyone who owns it is a family member. They all share the same religious beliefs. They have the same ideas. And they have one common belief, that paying for certain forms of birth control that operate after fertilization is sinful. Now, they're okay with condoms, they're okay with the birth control pill, but what they're opposed to are drugs that operate after the fertilization of the embryo, which is called the emergency contraceptive or intrauterine devices. So this is what they look like, if you like a picture. And they said, we do not want to pay for these 4 forms of birth control. As you can imagine, this became very controversial, the so-called war on women, that this company is trying to harm women. And in their case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. One of the ways I love talking about a Supreme Court case is to look at the signs that protesters hold up. Because signs are often very creative ways of describing how people feel about a case. So this one's my favorite sign. It says, if men can get pregnant, birth control will be from gumbo machines and be bacon flavored. This one also, my mom's not ready to be a grandma. You can use your imagination there. This is not a church, and this is not a healthcare plan. This woman's dressed up like a pack of birth control pills. These are not M&Ms. This sign, though, always seemed misguided to me. It says, hey, Supreme Court, no bosses in my bedroom. I'm sure Hobby Lobby would agree with this because they don't want to fund what's going on in your bedroom. So this sign did seem to miss the mark with me. Contraceptive is my business, not my boss's business, not my boss' business. Punctuation is optional, the hashtag. Corporations are not people, my friend. Oh, and this one's my favorite. You want to try and guess what this is?
It's supposed to be a beer?
Hey, you're cute. She crocheted a uterus.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure she bought her yarn at Joann's or somewhere else. She did not buy her yarn at Hobby Lobby. And it was actually a campaign, I'm not kidding you, to mail these crocheted uteruses to Hobby Lobby's headquarters in Oklahoma City, saying, here, mess with this uterus.